Hello, New York 11 and everyone joining us from everywhere, either live or watching the recording later. This is Brittany Ramos DeBarros. I am so excited that you are able to join us today. For those of you who don't know me, I am running for Congress in New York 11 to flip the district and remove our current Trump-endorsed Republican representative that we have, because she's not really fighting for our community. And folks came to me and asked me to run because of my organizing background and work in social justice. But I'm so excited today that we have a special guest joining us, Assemblywoman Mathylde Frontus, who also has a long history of working in the community. And, you know, I think is someone who really embodies what it means to approach this work as a servant leader, whose role is to really show up in service and care to our communities. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is what that has looked like for her throughout her journey. If you have questions or comments, please drop them in the chat. Give your reacts, share this on your social media to help spread the word. And Mathylde, thank you so much for joining us today.
Brittany, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here that I'm practically shining from top to bottom here.
You're glowing. You're glowing. Yes.
We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm just excited that today's finally here and we get to do this.
I am too. Yes, absolutely. Definitely one of many ideas and dreams that I hope that we can manifest together over the next several months and years even. So, you know, folks who watch our live stream, have seen our Talk About It Tuesdays before, know that this platform is really an opportunity to uplift the many, many different people from all different backgrounds who have been doing incredible work in our community. And your district just barely is right adjacent, overlapping, and we might even have more overlap as redistricting happens. And so,
yep.
You know, tell us a little bit about your story, your background, and kind of how you ended up in the role that you're in today.
So first of all, thank you for having me. And I'm sitting here sort of cracking up because I promised people in Coney Island I would stop sharing my story. I've been talking about it now for so many years, but I assume you have a wider audience tonight. So I'll go ahead and share it again. But in a nutshell, I'm a first generation American, a daughter of Haitian immigrants who came to the US for a better life. I was born in Southern Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and I moved to Coney Island. I always start my story with me moving to Coney Island when I was just 7 years old. And that's how I became the Assemblywoman today in my 40s. So it was a long journey of growing up in this community, really sort of like really being really interested in like community, looking at how my community was always very different than the other neighborhoods I would visit. I remember that very well as a child, you know, so I'd go to like other parts of Brooklyn and I'd be like, that's interesting. You know, they have cleaner streets, or they have more amenities, or they have more restaurants, or I'm just noticing like some differences, to say nothing of some of the deterioration that we had here. And that got me on a journey to be interested in social work and community and organizing. And the rest is kind of history. By the time I sort of grew into my own skin as a teenager, you know, everybody was sort of figuring out what they wanted to be. I remember being in high school when people were sort of taking aptitude tests and deciding, you know, what they wanted to study in college. And I remember, you know, making a list and thinking about it. Do I like medicine? Do I like law? Do I want to be a teacher? And what really sort of spoke to my heart was becoming a social worker. And I did that because I was interested both in community as well as the individual aspect. You know, in social work, we talk about the individual in his or her environment. So it's like we are people all living within certain contexts. And that's kind of, you know, what pushed me into social work. And that pushed me into starting numerous programs over the years, becoming a community activist. And just as you tell your story, Brittany, mine is similar in that I was asked to run. When an opportunity presented itself, people said, you have been doing this work and we trust you to represent us. And that's kind of why I took the leap and ran in 2018 for this seat.
And won. Yes, that's so exciting. And you have such a powerful story. And so I'm glad you shared it with us, even if folks in Coney Island have heard it a bunch of times. And um, I would love to hear a little bit more about some of those programs. And particularly, today, one of the initial kind of areas of work that I kind of bucketed on my platform, we called care, not criminalization, because I do think that for me, this is so much about caring for community and seeing the ways that when politicians allow profit and politics to get in the way, that what is sacrificed is real care, right? And we're seeing that with some of the struggles right now at the federal level around Build Back Better. And some of these, there's just so many opportunities presenting themselves, and we need so much. And I believe, that there's enough to go around if we have leaders who are really prioritizing care as the kind of central driver. And so long before you got to office, you had been caring for community. So what are some of the ways that you did that? And what are some of the ways that you think about what it means to care for community?
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say thank you again for talking about this topic. When you invited me to be here, I find myself saying, wow, that's a really great topic. Like, I feel like we should be having town hall meetings in our communities. And I just sort of envision myself, meeting with local residents and leaders and having a frank conversation in terms of what does it mean to care for a community? And I jotted down a few things because, I've been doing it for many years, but never really thought about it that way. But that's exactly what I've been doing. I think caring for community is to look out for one another. It's having a sense that you are part of a neighborhood, that the people that live around you are like a family, so you're sharing in all of the concerns, other people's concerns are your concerns. If people care about their children, then you care about their children, whether or not you have children yourself. If people care about their pets, then so do you. Sharing in the load, sharing in the burden, that's something I felt heavy on my spirit many years ago. Like in my 20s, I would look at other people and look at the problems that they were having. And I literally would feel as if, it was my own problem. These people are struggling. These people are looking for work. These people have relatives who are incarcerated. That's something we should all care about. It shouldn't just be those particular families. Trying to advance together, right? It's this idea of like our collective destiny. And that if one of us, struggles, we all struggle. But if one of us succeeds, we all succeed. So really, I feel like I was blessed. I was able to do all of these things. I was able to, pursue an education, go to college, have a graduate degree. But I came right back into the neighborhood and people said, what are you doing? I can't tell you how many people said that to me. They said, what are you doing here? Why are you doing that? Why did you come back to Coney Island? You did all these things. Oh, yeah. Plenty of people said that to me.
I know. I saw that from Staten Island too.
And they say, girl, come on, get out of here. Go travel the world. Go do something important, as if I was too good to serve the neighborhood. And I remember saying, no, you've got it all wrong. You've got it all wrong. This is exactly what I'm supposed to do because I'm from here and this is my neighborhood. And I want to be one of the many people pitching in. So I think trying to make sure that we all advance together, I had a sense that I didn't want to leave people behind. So everything that I was able to do for myself, I came back and I grabbed someone else and I took, generations of young people to like visit college campuses on my watch, help people prepare for their SATs, on my watch, help people purchase their first home, on my watch, get information, do all of these things to really promote a sense of well-being in the neighborhood. And lastly, I would just say protecting each other from harm. When you really think about community, it should be no different than the way you feel about your own family. I don't want my mother being knocked to the ground while she walks outside doing her groceries. And you know what? Because I don't want it to happen to my mother, I don't want it to happen to anyone else's mother. I should care about the neighbors next door, the people across the street, everyone that lives in my neighborhood. So it's really having this sense of like, I am one of many people and that we all have a common destiny together. And I think that's what community has meant to me. So what are some examples of that, you asked? Well, in short, I was able to start a couple of different nonprofit organizations.
Mhm.
which till this day, I really just consider it an honor and a privilege that I was able to do that. I don't even know if I have that kind of energy anymore. And people would say, what are you talking about? You're an elected official. Well, you know what? It was a lot of energy to start a nonprofit, to start it from scratch, to not, I started it with an $18,000 grant in my hand.
Wow.
And I said, I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm going to take some of this money. I'm going to get an office and I'm going to have faith and it's all going to work itself out. But Brittany, we've talked about this before. What I was able to do was little by little in my own sort of layperson way. I wasn't an anthropologist. I didn't have my PhD back then. um, I just said, what do we need to heal in this community? What are some of the problems that I see with my own two eyes? What are some of the issues that I see? And from there, I built little by little this multi service. I always called it like the little engine that could, a little multi service, one stop shop nonprofit, because that's how I had imagined it in my head, that I wanted a place that people can come in. And yes, they could ask for jobs. They can find out where are there people hiring. They could look for housing if they're looking for an apartment, or they can get home ownership assistance. I was proud to have started one of the first LGBTQ programs in Coney Island. Very, very exciting. I remember when we had some of those earlier meetings, it was standing room only. We ran out of chairs. People were standing up. We also started the first veterans outreach program. Mm-hmm. And created a linkage and a partnership with the VA. And again, at the time, like, was it part of like a master plan? No, I literally just made a list of like, what are the things missing? This is what a community needs to thrive. And I'm not seeing it with my eyes. So I'm going to go ahead, regardless of my age, regardless that I was, just a girl that grew up in the neighborhood. And I'm going to connect the dots. And I called it my social work brain, thinking about resources, connections. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't do everything, but I brought people in. I used the little office and invited legal organizations to come. I invited the VA to come and hold office hours in my little storefront. Mm-hmm. I invited the LGBT organizations all the way in Manhattan who were getting big money and were getting grants. They came all the way down to Coney Island and they held office hours. We did financial planning, helping people get their credit score. We did youth leadership, helping young people prepare for college. And those memories are so precious to me. I'll never forget it because it shows the power of what one person can do, two people, three people. You and I right now having a conversation with each other, two people having a conversation can say, let's do this, and literally create a wave, create a ripple wave in your community and do something pretty big that touches a lot of lives. And I always found that very exciting, that we all can be this sort of catalyst for change.
Yeah, it really is, because I think especially when we're thinking about the needs in our community, right? For a lot of us, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed, right? Just like, we're up against so much, against these giant systems that feel so intractable. And it's, at least for me, especially, I think we're both kind of empathic type people. And I feel that really hard sometimes, just like, the families in our communities that are just suffering, and there's just so much need that's not being met. And yet it was powerful in my journey too, when there was like a lightning rod moment where I realized that my voice as a veteran had power that I had not realized all this time before, right? To be speaking up about some of these needs and some of these issues, and my own truth and my own experience. And I do think that that is such a powerful thing, is just like realizing the power that you already have. And, I think sometimes that we don't, we're made to feel like we're small and like that there's not a lot we can do.
Exactly. And like our voice doesn't matter.
Right.
I can see that now. I remember back in those days, and I always talk about being younger because I think there's something just about being inexperienced in certain things.
Mhm.
So our hearts are like willing and we have the vision, but we feel intimidated. I
Mhm.
remember feeling a little intimidated, by some elected officials just because of they kind of walk into a room with a sort of burst of energy, and not everyone was particularly accessible. It's not like they were giving you their cell phone, and there was a sense of like sometimes they were like up there and you were down here, and it was a big to do, like you were trying to speak to a celebrity, like if you had sort of went to a concert and you were trying to get an autograph from a performing artist or something. Like I remember that sort of distance
Yeah.
between like feeling like a regular person, like, well, let me stay in my place, let me stay in my place and just do my work. And I don't want to sort of jump the gun, but I think that's another conversation for another Talk About It Tuesdays, in terms of like how to like have different leadership and be a different kind of leader, an elected leader, and just kind of project something different where you are accessible, like people can talk to you, people could be a part of like what's happening at your office. But yeah, and so I've sort of continued in that path, and even now as an elected official, my staff, I think, will tell you that we do a lot more than we get paid to do. People
Yeah.
talk about doing things above their pay grade.
Mhm.
I think we're a good example of that. For starters, somebody out there thinks that the assembly is a part-time job, which I always find hilarious, like stand-up comedy. I'm like, that is really funny. That's hilarious. It's not a part-time job. I could barely sleep. There are barely enough hours in the day. So we're working all the time. But I should say that on paper, it's this sort of part-time job where we're legislators. So we just pass bills from January to June. And like, after June, I don't know, take a vacation. Maybe you have a business on the side. I don't know. But that's not what's happening. And I'll tell you a little bit in a couple of minutes, but you probably heard that we implemented the 6-point economic mobility plan, which is, again, I call another part of my social work brain, where I'm like, okay, so how do we touch more people? How do we get more people in? How do we keep creating those ripple waves in the neighborhood? And going back to like what it means to care for community, I'm looking at the points that I shared, looking out for each other, sharing the load and the burden, trying to advance together collectively, protecting each other from harm, other people's problems or my own. We're kind of like trying to do that with the economic mobility plan, right?
Yeah.
Because it's when we talk about what are we fighting for, well, we fought for different things. Like we fought against hunger, we fought against violence, gun violence, we fought for economic justice. I'm fighting for environmental justice right now as I speak to you. So there are a lot of different little mini battles going on that at any given time you can sort of find us involved in. So we are kind of like an activist office, I would say.
I love that. And it's one of the things I really appreciate about your leadership too, is that, I think that there's a lot of folks who might have really amazing ideology, right? And be really aligned, but there's something about you that I've noticed from the beginning, which is just you're so practical. You're so down to earth, right? You're like, I see you as a very visionary person. I think as evidenced by all of these things that you've listed that you have built, but um, that are transformative, right? When we approach the safety of our community through the lens of hunger and environmental justice and economic justice and all of these things, that is a holistic way to approach safety and health, right? That ultimately can be transformational for our communities rather than just reactive to the problems that we have where we're not addressing the root causes, right? And what I appreciate though so much is, you do have all of that ideology. You're a professor, you're a doctor, as you mentioned. But also you're just like such a get it done, like, no, but for real, like, how do we walk away with a plan to actually care for people, right? And sometimes I feel like there's just not enough of that in the political arena. And I do think that that's where the lived experiences of what it's like to try to navigate these systems, or the difference between an ideological alignment and a visceral alignment with something, right?
Mhm.
And I'm curious, growing up in the neighborhood and your parents being immigrants, how did some of those personal experiences for you are they informing the way that you think about some of that, like, care policy and care work today? Or what are the ways that you've seen that inform your work as a leader?
Yeah, that again, thank you for the question and thank you for forcing me to sort of reflect and reminisce on many of these things. I'm even sort of closing my eyes as I take a trip down memory lane. All of the work that I do now, it's been very personal. I like sort of intellectual conversations as much as the next person. I like to watch the news and see what's going on. But as you said, it's very, very different when certain policy issues that we argue about on the floor of Congress, when they're happening right outside your window.
Right.
I listen to the gunshots, on a regular basis. We know the families involved. It's a total different situation, knowing people whose children have been affected, visiting people in the hospital, helping families bury their loved ones, helping people cover the cost of a funeral,
Yeah.
um, potentially having people shoot in front of your door. Not potentially, I lost a neighbor of mine many years ago. That's part of the story that I share in early 2000. It's 21 years now. My one of my neighbors who lives a couple of homes down from me um, was robbed, and I think the person robbing him sort of panicked for whatever reason because he was trying to run away and shot him, obviously unnecessarily, and he lost his life at the age of 18. That bothered me on such a deep level that I can never shake it off. Number one, because I knew him and all the kids on my block, we all sort of played together when we were little. This was like a smart kid who had big dreams, to go to college. He was in his senior year of high school. He had already been accepted to Hunter and wanted to do all these things. But I just remember being obsessed with it. Like, this is like not normal. How is this happening, in America and much less like on my block, like next to where I sleep at night? That made it so personal for me. Like, this is a problem. And you can't live in a neighborhood and just kind of look at problems and just be like, this is ridiculous. And because you know what? Then you'll just be like, I can't take it anymore. I'm getting out of here. And everybody sort of has different responses, right? To different things that they see. So you either are like indifferent, you're like, listen, I don't want nothing to do with this. Or you sort of say, what are we going to do? And it's not to judge. I'm saying like we all just have different visceral reactions to these issues that we see. And again, maybe for me, this is just like a calling, I guess, even as a teenager. I mean, I was too young to sort of process any really fancy thoughts, but I just remember thinking, oh no, this is not okay. And what are the adults in my neighborhood going to do about this? And then I became an adult, and it was like, what am I going to do about it?
Right.
Because it's not I always say this cheesy line that, aliens are not going to come and solve all problems. Like, there's no one else to look to. Like, we don't have some space cadets who are coming. Like, we have to figure out our own problems in our communities, all of the unpleasant ones, the ones that we haven't sorted out yet. I don't think we still know really how to get people to stop using guns to solve their problems, and it's because it's not a singular issue. It's not a unidimensional issue. People use guns for different reasons, but I think that there are some things that connect everyone. We have a culture of guns in America. I think a
Mhm.
lot of it is sort of tied to sort of like ideas of gender and ideas of sort of being tough and maleness and this idea of like being tough and macho and all sorts of other things. You throw race into there. I think there's like a whole campaign where generations of Black and brown boys have been sort of told and taught um, that they must be tough and they must be sort of participating in this sort of type of lifestyle, and it's just so many things keep compounding it.
Yeah.
And it's personal. It is.
Yeah, it really is. And I think about too, I mean, as you're talking about the culture and the social dynamics that connect to this, I think too about, one of the things I often say is that we should be troubled by the fact that our only real, significantly funded federal jobs program, for example, requires you to carry a gun.
Mm,
Like sometimes I want folks to think about that, to slow down, right? And really think about what that means, because there are so many ways, right? Where euphemisms and the kind of trivialization of carrying guns in a war, right? In a video game, in our neighborhoods, right? That there's just like so many ways that this becomes so normalized in our culture.
absolutely.
um, and I think that we don't slow down enough to really think about some of those connections, right?
Absolutely.
And I really hear you too on the when it's close to home. I mean, I haven't shared this actually publicly yet, but and I didn't plan to, but just listening to your story, a kid in our neighborhood in high school got jumped in my driveway a couple weeks ago, and I was so terrified, right? To learn that, to shelter that kid in my home, what that would mean about the dynamics of heated community violence across neighborhoods. Um but also, what does it, what does it mean to like first prioritize, like I was scared that that kid could be killed, right? And that fear in your own driveway, in your own living room for our children, right? Teenagers, but children, our children. And, it just leaves you asking, what are the conditions that could allow, right? Could allow this kind of violence, like such violence amongst teenagers, right? Children.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that sometimes when we get caught up in this debate about policy, those kind of basic questions get lost.
Mhm.
Um, and, I'm curious how your previous work kind of helps you stay grounded in those conversations that can become very disconnected from the ugly day-to-day reality that does touch us personally in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is so powerful, and the truth is, it's really, really easy to get lost in the conversation, the
Mhm.
talking about it, the intellectualizing, the policy sort
Right.
of conversations. It's another thing to be on the ground. There's no price to put for living on the ground. So, I mean, we can write an eloquent paper about gun violence in America and talk about statistics and what's going on and how many youth are being affected and how many shootings we've had. But that's not the same as living in a community and understanding dynamics, understanding that we have Black and brown teenagers right now in the 5 boroughs who, and we can talk about it, we can get into it, right? But who are scared for their lives, which is something that I've never experienced in that way, other than just sort of praying that, I can walk outside safely and shop and do my groceries and come home, like, because New York, has crime, but it's not the same thing as like living in a public housing development and fearing that your life may be in danger if you drop your cousin off at another
Right.
development because you're not supposed to be there and you forgot or something, or
Right.
they weren't feeling well and you just went to look after them. And then suddenly you remembered that you don't belong on that street or you don't belong in that building. There's a whole other world. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything that's going on, that I would be lying to you. There's a whole
Right.
other world that exists with rules and protocols, and you have young people who were caught in a system. They're born into the system. I don't know where the rules came from.
Mhm.
We can parse it out, if it's sort of gangs controlling it or who is calling all these shots. But all I know is that our children are being born into these situations that are impossible. And instead of being able to just live freely and enjoy themselves and enjoy their youth and be children and play and ride their bicycles and have ice cream and do all of the things that a lot of us think are preserve the innocence of youth. They know too much. They're involved in all of these, that's sort of reminiscent of like these sort of shows on TV, like these sort of, mob shows. And you're like, why are children involved in these conversations? Like, why do they know about this and that and bodies and guns and not going here and you better not go there? Like, but we're not talking about that. So if you're just talking about policy and doing background check and all these things, but there's a whole like system and world and culture. Yeah. And but that's tied into your topic for tonight, caring about community. That's not going to be fixed. That's not a job for like a sheriff, or like a group to come like down and fix it. Unfortunately, there is no one in America whose job it is. Like, we don't have a position that exists for people to come, like a traveling van to bring people into communities to do that. And so every community has to sort of do like a community mapping of sort of like inventory of like human assets and human capital and say like, well, who's here? Who do we have here? It's one of the reasons why I started the Coney Island Clergy Coalition, and gave them a little funding for so this is a tongue twister, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Network. I'm sure that's not the name, but that's what, but basically because, we were having a meeting one day and we were like, you know what? A lot of the groups that we sort of just relied on over the years, has anyone noticed they're no longer here? Like, people have shuttered their doors. People have lost their grants. People that used to do work with sex workers, with, that used to do drug testing, they haven't been here in 5 years. We've been kind of busy and we're not paying attention. Do you not see that now people are like openly shooting on the streets? Do we not see that now people are just desperate for help? Like, just literally in broad daylight at 9:00 in the morning, already high or shooting or doing something, and in need of help.
Yeah.
So the mapping, the community mapping is sort of saying, well, who's here? Who do we have? We have clergy. We have elected officials. We have housing leaders. And so communities have to make a list. We have parents, etc. We have business owners. And what can everybody do?
Yeah.
What can we all do?
Yeah. That's a really helpful, I think, practical place to start, right? And I think that that's so helpful because of the overwhelm I was talking about earlier. And so I'm curious, you said, I appreciate that you said, we need to really, or kind of a version of like, we really need to build up kind of infrastructure for a system to address community needs in this particular way, right? And like, we can't just retool the system that's not their purpose, right? To try to do that, to try to address these problems and think it's going to solve the problem in a holistic way. And so if you could wave a magic wand and, have a real investment in systems of care, right? Like if people gave you billions and billions and we're like, Mathylde, you can kind of build this however you want or invest this wherever you want. What are some of the things or some of the examples of things that are aspirations in your mind or in your vision for what that could look like, an alternative to what we have now or a building upon what we have now?
Oh, man.
I know, it's just a small question. Tell me all your dreams.
No, that's a good one. It's big. So I'm just taking a deep breath. I mean, I'm a big believer in, dreaming is important.
Mhm.
I think we're all born to dream. We all dream from the time we're children, and we always imagine what can be. But I also always try to be a pragmatist. And sometimes when we speak, I try not to be rude, but I'm like, you're speaking aspirationally, right? Yes. I'm like, you're saying how you would like for things to be. I'm like, that's great, but let's be clear. Let's sort of be clear about where we are, what we're able to do now within our reach. And then we could sort of paint a contract and say, however, I would like for us to get here one day.
Yeah.
If money were no object, so what works? We know that there's no magic wand, right? There are no sort of robots or other extra celestial, extraterrestrial, I should say, beings that are going to come and help us, right? So we're talking about humans helping humans. It's a human problem. It's going to be solved by humans.
Mhm.
That means that all of the models that we have of people helping people, you look at sort of like the cure violence model that the New York City utilizes, fashioned after the Chicago cure violence model. I know a little something about the program. I like it. It's not perfect, but I like it and it works.
Mhm.
And the question is, well, can you just sort of throw more money? Should we just sort of dump $1 billion in the program and expect it to work? I also find that that doesn't help because programs are still made up of like imperfect people, and programs are laden with like ideology and technical stuff. So I've seen with my eyes like how programs can be transformative.
Mhm.
You can have a gang member who is sort of harming his or her community, maybe not on purpose, but they're harming their community. They're doing harmful things. They're harming themselves. They're putting other people at risk. No matter how tough a person is, that person can be reached. That's something I learned a long time ago. Every human being can be reached. The
Mhm.
question is by whom and how. What is the best way to reach that person? It may not be me, it may not be you, but somebody can reach that person. The cure violence model sort of says it's based on the premise that a person who themselves, right, used to be in the lifestyle, used to sort of, maybe be faced with those same issues,
Mhm.
is the best person to now be speaking to people who are now currently in that lifestyle. I think that's sort of a good way of thinking about it. But that's just one example. I think, if I had a magic wand and money were no issue, I think there's the people to people work that
Mhm.
we could do to heal ourselves. And I haven't even talked all night tonight about structural and policy and the hand of government, which created a lot of the circumstances within which we find ourselves. But it's back to the social work model. A person in his or her environment. That's who we are. We're people living in an environment. So racist policies of the past, structural racist policies from
Mhm.
yesteryear have created the situations that we find ourselves in now.
Yeah.
But knowing that intellectually, teaching it to my students is always fun and interesting, but that doesn't help us. Yes, I know that. I'm aware. What happens now? Yes, it's true.
Mhm.
They created redlining, and after World War II, Black Americans were mostly excluded from most of the policies
That's
that gave white immigrants and white Americans a helping hand
yeah.
to live comfortable middle class lifestyles, to purchase homes, to go to college, and to get a leg up so
Mhm.
that they can develop into a middle class family.
Yeah.
Well, people of color and blacks were excluded from that. I know that. I know that. And I
Yeah.
know that that's how we got a sort of raw deal in a shorthand.
Mhm.
Okay. But I think for me anyway, and people can sort of have different opinions, what do we do now? We're existing within that context. All that does is explain our context. All that does is explain why my neighborhood looks the way it is.
Right. Right. Which is important as part of the process, right? Because otherwise, I think a lot of us, I grew up definitely subject to kind of gaslighting around like, oh, your poverty is your own fault and your entire community's own fault, right? This kind of shaming of poverty, of struggle. And so, but you're right, it's not sufficient, right? Necessary, but not sufficient for what do we do now?
Right. And I hope we're not going sort of outside of like the topic, right? So it's like we know that, but then it's like so the work we have ahead of us is multi-layered, right? So I think for people who sort of see themselves as agents of change, we have to always work on dismantling those old systems. We have to work on creating new structures and new systems, because many of our systems are still sort of entrenched with our past and who we used to be, who we continue to be, some would argue.
Yeah.
And some of us are doing that work, but others of us, because I always talk about it's like, it's a football team and everyone has their part to play. Others of us need to heal, right? Heal back in the community. So some of us are gonna we're gonna do law and we're gonna advocate and we're gonna do all of that. We'll be policymakers, we'll run for office, like Brittany. And by the way, that's another talk about it on Tuesdays because we need more people to do that. I'd like to say we need to use the halls of government to reverse all of the policies that we've implemented over the last few centuries. But I think to bring it back to your topic tonight, it started with caring and it ends with caring. So after we've sort of sized up where we are and how we got here, after we've understood the sort of lay of the land and why our neighborhoods look the way they do, and understand that there was like sort of war, frankly, to sort of prevent people from sort of advancing. But now we understand that and we sort of say, okay, but let's help each other so that together we can move. We've got to figure it out, and it's not easy. I don't profess to know it all, but I'm doing the best I can. So my plate is full now. I'm doing economic justice. We're busy. We're helping people find a pathway forward. We're doing environmental justice. Got a big fight on our hands right now as I speak to you.
Yeah.
We're doing sort of some anti-poverty work, and everyone's got to find, what work they could do.
Yeah.
Understanding the system that we're in.
Yeah. And I think that's really important is, each one of us has something to offer, right? And you kind of started from that place. And but I think to the point about understanding the history of how we got here as a first, but not, as a necessary, but also not sufficient step. I mean, I think part of the other value of that is that we have to understand the specific roles that those policies have played to avoid making those same mistakes in the future, right? But just with different, but just looking slightly differently, right? Is we can't we have to, otherwise history repeats itself, right?
Absolutely. I feel like jumping out of my chair. Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to start all over again and revamp. But it's happening. Like we need humane policies. And that's where candidates come in, government comes in, using the halls of government as another battleground to do some of this work. I like to tell audiences who listen, whoever wants to listen, that when you look at some of the ugly chapters of our past, it wasn't individual. It's not just that people sort of spat on blacks and said, get out of here, we don't like you, don't come here. Or it's not just that LGBT members were just sort of told, don't come to our party, you're not welcome here. It was deeper than that. The law was used. Yeah, the law was used. It was enshrined in the law. We had exclusion acts. We had Chinese people excluded. We had Native Americans. We had Japanese. We had Black Americans. We had don't ask, don't tell in the military. So groups had the weight of government um, to stand on their neck, so to speak, to oppress. When we consider that now, we have an obligation when we talk about all the tools we have at our disposal for social justice. So now we use those same tools, which is what you were saying.
Mhm.
So we need progressive legislation. And you see that the law is still a battleground now. You see people fighting using the law, using policy. You see Texas. So women's rights are still on the table, being fought over. Women's right to choose. Oh, it's really upsetting. You see immigrants' rights still on the table. People still argue till today over how much rights immigrants should have and how much access should they have to fully, participate, and so on and so forth. Transgender, etc.
Yep. Yeah, and it's, I do think I lean towards, I love to envision what's possible, right? Another world that's possible. Um, but I do think it's so critical to have our feet so firmly planted on the grounds of those realities today, right? And I think that using every tool at our disposal, like you're saying, including government, and I also want folks to remember, right, that there's so many ways that mutual aid is this concept that is, I'm helping you because these are our resources, right? And there have been these systemic disenfranchisement policies, these policies that have made people poor, have made them houseless, have
Mhm.
created the job markets that we have, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm not doing this out of this sense of kind of like charity. Not that there's anything wrong with people being charitable, but because my liberation, my joy, my safety, my wellness as a fellow neighbor is bound up with yours,
Mhm.
right? And this kind of rootedness and interconnectedness. And it's one of the things I love about mutual aid, right? I know sometimes when we're talking in the community groups and folks bring up mutual aid, folks are like, what does that mean? But that's the difference, right? Is that mutual aid is coming from that lens of
Mhm.
we are going to care for each other because our fates are intertwined, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I care about what happens to you like I care about what happens to me. And I think, man, imagine just continuing to cultivate that is so beautiful. And one of the things I've, really been enjoying seeing is different politicians around the country thinking about how they can use their offices as well to connect with those kinds of community issues. That's something I think your office, you called it an activist office, but I think that that's something that you all do really beautifully, and the kind of having it be a community hub for care, right, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
the times are dire. I mean, sometimes people don't have another place to go. Nonprofits are wonderful, and they're amazing, but they're always one grant away,
I
you know,
know.
from being able, and it's tough. It's
It
tough.
is.
So everyone I think can use what they have, whether it's their house of worship, whether it's their school, their civic group, their block association,
Mm.
their office, whoever they are. And thank you for really sort of bringing this topic, I think, to the forefront, because I think from time to time we need to pause and think, like, are we doing as much as we can? And what does caring look like?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I think you're one of the many people locally who I really admire, who I feel like has paved the way for people like me to run the way that I am today. And so, thank you for being here, for joining us. Any last words before we say goodnight?
No, just for everyone who's watching. Brittany, I could go on and on. I just really, you are admired as well. And you're shining, and you're just really appreciated. And we appreciate that you're on this journey. And thank you for talking about this really important issue. I think your campaign is like another expression of like, what we're talking about tonight. I say it over and over again. Everybody's got to do something,
Mhm.
right? Don't worry about what I'm doing. You find something that works for you. Not everybody's going to run. It's okay. It's
Yeah,
okay. But just tell me, what can you do now that we know what's going on, now that we know what we're up against?
yeah.
And you took that call, so thank you. And for
Thank you.
everyone else who's watching, they'll do something that feels right for them.
Yes.
But thanks for making us remember.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we will call it a night for tonight, but I know that we have many more future Talk About It Tuesdays that we should host. So I'll look forward to those. And Assembly member Dr. Mathylde Frontus, everyone, give her flowers for the work that she has done. And I hope that everyone enjoys your night and sign up for something, get involved. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that obviously we have November elections coming up. We do have some generals in our district and throughout the city. So it's so critical, everyone, that you make sure that you have your plan to vote. There are days of early voting. So check out what day you can go and make sure that you make a plan. We shouldn't take anything for granted. We've talked so much about how much is at stake for our communities tonight, and who is in those positions making those decisions really does matter in our everyday lives, especially in these local elections. Sometimes have more of an impact on our lives than even the federal election that I'm running in, and so it's really critical. So make a plan to vote, sign up, get involved, and everybody also rest, enjoy, and take good care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Brittany.